The sky was still dark when the first reports began trickling in. At first, it seemed like a glitch, an optical illusion, or a malfunction in military satellites. But then, the truth broke through the noise, clear and undeniable. A fleet of ships, far larger than any human vessel, had appeared in Earth's orbit. They weren't just near the planet, they were all around it. The world held its breath as global governments scrambled to respond. Dr. Sylvia Morgan, a geneticist working at a research facility in Paris, watched the news unfold on a screen in her lab. The calm, cold voice of the newscaster repeated the words "unknown species," followed by "sudden and unexplained appearance." A chill ran down her spine. She had spent her career studying human evolution, unlocking secrets about the dormant capabilities within the human genome. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. The ships didn't open fire immediately. They seemed to just watch. Their shapes were unlike anything the human eye had ever seen, shifting, almost fluid, as if they were alive. Within hours, the world was in panic mode. Militaries around the globe scrambled jets, deployed ground forces, and rushed to protect key cities. But no one knew what to expect. No one knew the capabilities of these visitors, or even if they wanted to communicate. The first attack came without warning. In New York, a column of smoke rose from the heart of the city as energy blasts struck a skyscraper. These weren't ordinary explosions. They were surgical, precise, and devastating. The alien ships began to descend, their engines glowing with an otherworldly light. Panic spread like wildfire. Governments declared martial law. People flooded the streets in terror, but the aliens' strategy was clear. They were not interested in communication. They had arrived to conquer. As the global resistance attempted to mount a coordinated defense, another, stranger event unfolded. In the chaos of the first few hours, some humans, isolated from the initial attacks, began to report strange occurrences. In a crowded subway station in London, a young woman suddenly lifted an entire car off its tracks, her hands glowing with an ethereal light. In the streets of Tokyo, a man who had been cornered by alien forces summoned a burst of energy so intense it temporarily disintegrated the ground beneath him. These occurrences were nothing short of miraculous. At first, most dismissed them as hysteria, but then they began to multiply. News outlets were flooded with footage of civilians showing impossible strength, manipulating objects without touching them, and even displaying unearthly speed and agility. The invaders, however, seemed to pay little attention to this phenomenon. They moved relentlessly toward their goals, scanning Earth's defenses, disabling satellites, and deploying soldiers from their ships. But what the Exelnak, those were the invaders' names, gleaned from intercepted signals, did not understand was that these sudden powers were no accident. They had triggered something in humanity's DNA, something ancient. Dr. Morgan, who had long hypothesized that the human genome held secrets yet to be uncovered, began to suspect that the aliens had unknowingly awakened dormant abilities in the human race. This wasn't just random chaos, it was evolution forcing its hand. At that moment, a single thought reverberated through her mind. The Exelnak had made a grave mistake. While the invaders continued their brutal offensive, humanity's new powers, still unpredictable and unrefined, began to make themselves known, and in every corner of the world, whispers began. Could this be the beginning of something more? Dr. Morgan wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. Humanity had just been given a second chance, and it would not be wasted. The days after the initial attacks were a blur of chaos. Governments fell into disarray as cities were leveled, communication lines went dark, and civilians sought shelter from the alien onslaught. In the wake of the destruction, something strange began to happen, something the Selnak didn't expect and humanity had never seen before. People began to exhibit extraordinary abilities, seemingly linked to the sudden alien presence in the sky. It started small, A woman in Rome lifting an entire car to save a child from an oncoming alien drone. A man in Berlin running at an impossible speed, outracing a group of Excelnac shock troopers. These moments of brilliance, brief as they were, sparked hope. But for Dr. Sylvia Morgan, they were a sign of something more. She had seen the genetic data from her own research, theories about latent abilities woven into the DNA of every human being. What had been myth and legend in human history was now becoming reality, powers that humans were never meant to have. Dr. Morgan found herself at the center of the unfolding mystery. Working feverishly in her lab, she tried to decode the strange biochemical signals coming from the bodies of the humans displaying these new abilities. Her hypothesis was simple yet profound. The Excelnac ships, with their alien technology, had somehow triggered an evolutionary leap in the human species, unlocking dormant genetic sequences that had been lying in wait for centuries. The human race had always held the potential for powers. Now, they were beginning to manifest. But why? Was this intentional or purely accidental? As the days wore on, more and more reports of strange occurrences came in from all over the world. In Paris, a woman with psychic abilities began moving objects at will, pushing back the alien forces that had surrounded her neighborhood. In Africa, a group of hunters discovered they could communicate telepathically, coordinating their movements without a single word spoken. The powers weren't limited to one region, and they weren't limited to a specific group of people. Every continent was affected, and as the number of awakened humans grew, so did their potential. The problem was, they were still untrained and disorganized. While the new abilities gave humanity a fighting chance, the Excelnac were far from defeated. They were methodical, calculating, and advanced beyond anything Earth's forces could muster. Their weapons were capable of disintegrating buildings, vaporizing entire divisions of soldiers, and their control of the skies made counteroffensives all but impossible. For every awakened human who used their newfound abilities to strike back, there were 10 more who were unprepared, confused, and easily overwhelmed by the Excelnac's firepower. Global resistance groups began forming, though not without friction. Different nations had different ideas about how to confront the invaders, and without a unified leadership, the human efforts were fragmented. In the midst of this, a critical turning point occurred, the first successful counterattack. A group of awakened civilians, led by a former soldier named Kai Walker, managed to infiltrate an enemy supply base in Eastern Europe. They used a combination of telepathic coordination, strength-enhanced individuals, and invisibility cloaks they had scavenged from Excelnac wreckage. The strike was a resounding success, knocking out a major Excelnac energy core and sending the invaders into disarray. For the first time, humanity had forced the enemy to retreat. The victory was small, but it was enough to galvanize the human resistance. Walker, a natural leader, quickly became a figurehead. His strategy was simple but effective. Hit fast, hit hard, and disrupt the enemy's supply lines. Walker and the other resistance leaders realized that humanity's greatest strength lay not in their ability to match the aliens in firepower, but in their unpredictability. The Excelnac, who relied on meticulous planning and superior technology, had no idea how to deal with a force as chaotic and desperate as humanity's newfound abilities. But despite this breakthrough, Dr. Morgan knew they were only scratching the surface. The true potential of the human race had yet to be realized. The Excelnac might be a formidable force, but they had awakened a sleeping giant, and the fight was only beginning. As the resistance spread across the world, it was clear that humanity was not going to wait to be saved. They were going to take their destiny into their own hands, and the Excelnac would soon find out what that truly meant. Dr. Morgan, watching the sparks of rebellion flare up across the globe, had one thought that drove her forward. The silent awakening had only just begun. The first victory of the human resistance was not without its cost. The Excelnac forces were far from disorganized, and their countermeasures were swift. Within days of their setback in Eastern Europe, the invaders retaliated with overwhelming force. Large swaths of the continent were razed, cities turned into smoldering ruins as the Excelnac's energy weapons scorched everything in their path. But even as the ground turned to ash, humanity's defiance only grew stronger. General Kai Walker, now a symbol of humanity's resolve, was already planning his next move. The successful sabotage of the Excelnac power core had dealt a blow, but to win this war, they needed to hit the aliens where it would hurt most: their supply chains and communication hubs. The enemy had no shortage of weaponry, but what they lacked was a coordinated response from their command. And it was this disarray that Walker intended to exploit. In the dead of night, Walker's team, comprised of awakened humans with a variety of abilities, slipped behind enemy lines in a daring raid. The target was a Excelnac communications hub in a remote corner of South America. This was a high-risk mission. Without the element of surprise, they would be wiped out in seconds. But Walker's troops were ready. They had trained in secrecy for months, honing their abilities and learning to coordinate like never before. The plan was simple: strike fast, disable their communications, and disappear before the enemy could launch a full-scale assault. The resistance fighters, led by a small cadre of awakened with enhanced senses and telekinetic abilities, infiltrated the facility's perimeter undetected. The silent tension was palpable as they maneuvered through the dense jungle. No shots were fired, no alarms blared, just the hum of the wind through the trees and the steady beat of their hearts. Then, all at once, chaos erupted. A telepathic link between two of the awakened allowed them to pinpoint the Excelnac officers inside the facility. A few dozen soldiers, armed with weapons that could tear through human flesh like paper, were scattered across the compound. But the resistance fighters were faster. A soldier with enhanced speed zipped past a patrol, disabling a key communication relay in a flash. Another, with telekinetic strength, hurled massive boulders to block entry points, creating barriers and isolating sections of the compound. In the blink of an eye, the Excelnac were disoriented. The real shock came when Sarah, one of the most gifted awakened, used her mind to infiltrate the Excelnac's communication system. With a focused burst of telepathic energy, she sabotaged their long-range communications, rendering the entire facility deaf and blind. The Excelnac were now isolated from their fleet, unable to call reinforcements. But even with this advantage, the battle was not over. The Excelnac, realizing they had been outmaneuvered, immediately launched a retaliatory strike. Their massive drones, impervious to small arms fire, descended from the sky with pinpoint accuracy. Within minutes, the resistance team found themselves facing an all-out assault, Excelnac warriors pouring in from every angle. Walker's team fought fiercely, using their newfound powers to hold the line. Yet, despite their strength, the Excelnac numbers were overwhelming. Just as the resistance forces were about to be overwhelmed, an unexpected miracle occurred. A massive surge of energy, as if the earth itself had awakened, erupted from deep within the jungle. It was a coordinated burst of power from every awakened present, amplifying their abilities to the extreme. The resulting shockwave sent a dozen Excelnac soldiers flying through the air, their bodies crumpling under the pressure. For a brief moment, the battlefield went silent. The dust cleared and the remaining Excelnac forces retreated. The resistance had held their ground, and the communications hub was disabled. The message was clear: Earth would not fall quietly. Back at the makeshift command center, the news of the victory spread like wildfire. The first major defeat for the Excelnac, however small, was a rallying cry for the resistance. But there was no time to rest on their laurels. Walker knew this was just the beginning. The Excelnac would adapt. They would regroup, and they would return. Humanity had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The real fight was about to begin. The silent rebellion had awakened, and the Excelnac were in for a fight they had never seen before. The resistance was no longer just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the first strike had only just begun to shift the balance. The victory in South America had sent ripples of hope across the world. The Excelnac, once thought invincible, had been dealt a humiliating blow. But General Kai Walker knew better than to get complacent. The alien forces were relentless, and their response would be swift and brutal. The time for small-scale skirmishes was over. If humanity was going to survive, they needed to strike at the heart of the Excelnac's power and cripple their ability to wage war. The plan Walker devised was audacious: a full-scale raid on one of the Excelnac's main command centers, a sprawling base hidden deep in the Arctic. This base was a nerve center for the alien fleet, housing everything from their advanced weapons technology to key military leadership. Taking it out would not only weaken their command structure, but also deliver a psychological blow to the invaders, showing that humanity could strike at the very core of their operations. But the task was daunting. The Excelnac's security was impenetrable, their technology far more advanced than anything humanity had ever seen. They controlled the skies with unmanned drones, deployed cloaked sentries, and maintained a near-perfect perimeter of defense. The only way to infiltrate such a stronghold was with a plan that combined not just brute force, but cunning and subtlety. Walker knew that the Awakened, with their diverse range of abilities, were humanity's greatest asset. But they needed more than just raw power, they needed precision. For this mission, he assembled a team of specialists. Sarah, the telepath who had infiltrated the Excelnac's communications before; Jonah, a young man with the ability to phase through solid matter; and Marcus, a tactician with an unparalleled gift for battlefield strategy. Together, they would lead a small team of Awakened on the most dangerous mission humanity had ever attempted. The plan hinged on the element of surprise. The Resistance had learned that the Excelnac could not detect telepathic activity at long range, a weakness that had yet to be exploited. Sarah's abilities would allow the team to sneak past their perimeter undetected, even bypassing their advanced sensor systems. Meanwhile, Jonah's power to phase through objects would allow the team to bypass locked doors and hidden passages, slipping through walls and defenses as if they didn't exist. Marcus would use his keen strategic mind to guide the team through the complex, ensuring they avoided any potential traps set by the aliens. The mission began with the team traveling by covert transport, an old military plane retrofitted with scavenged Excelnac tech, to a remote landing zone miles from the Arctic base. The harsh, frozen landscape provided cover, but it also posed challenges. The cold was brutal, and the team's stealth was critical. They navigated through blinding snowstorms, avoiding detection by the aliens' ground patrols. Once they reached the perimeter, Sarah's telepathic ability became the first line of defense, creating a psychic barrier that masked their presence from the Excelnac sensors. The infiltration was going according to plan until they hit the first obstacle. An unexpected patrol of Excelnac drones appeared, their weapons trained on the team. It was a test, a critical moment that could determine their success or failure. Without hesitation, Walker gave the order to retreat, but Jonah, seeing an opening, acted quickly. He phased through the ground, appearing beneath the drones and disabling them with a single strike. The others followed suit, moving with precision, each awakened using their powers to neutralize threats silently and efficiently. They pressed forward, entering the heart of the alien base. Inside, the Excelnac were unprepared for the scale of the attack. While Walker's team methodically took out key communication arrays and sabotage points, Sarah had a more personal task: to locate and neutralize the command center. As she delved deeper into the alien structure, she uncovered a chilling secret. The Excelnac were working on a weapon of unimaginable power, a device capable of wiping out entire cities in a single blow. The team reached the command center, but not without encountering the alien leadership. A battle ensued, one that tested the limits of their abilities. The XLNAC commander, a towering figure with cybernetic enhancements and telepathic control, was a formidable foe. But Walker's team was more than a match. Using their combined abilities, telekinesis, invisibility, and enhanced strength, they fought back with a ferocity born of desperation. In the end, it was Sarah who landed the final blow, using her telepathic powers to overload the XLNAC commander's mind, causing a psychic explosion that incapacitated him long enough for Marcus to disable the command center's main systems. The mission was a success, but only just. The team escaped the base as alarms blared and XLNAC reinforcements arrived. With the command center in ruins, the XLNAC's grip on Earth's northern regions was broken. Humanity had struck a decisive blow, and for the first time since the invasion began, the alien forces were forced to retreat. But Walker knew that the XLNAC would regroup. They always did. The war was far from over. Yet in that moment, as he watched the burning remains of the base on the horizon, he allowed himself a rare moment of hope. Humanity was no longer just defending themselves. They were on the offensive, and the General's gambit had paid off. The victory at the Arctic Command Center was a pivotal moment, but it didn't bring the lasting peace humanity had hoped for. The XLNAC had suffered a significant blow, their supply lines disrupted and their command structure thrown into disarray. Yet the alien fleet remained strong, and their response was swift. Earth's forces had gained a small reprieve, but at a cost. The remaining XLNAC forces retaliated with a vengeance, bombarding several key human strongholds in the days following the Arctic raid. Major cities were reduced to rubble, their people fleeing or falling victim to the relentless strikes from orbit. Despite their growing powers, humanity's defenses were still limited. The Awakened could take down drones and soldiers with ease, but they couldn't stop entire fleets of alien warships from raining down destruction. The Resistance, under the leadership of General Kai Walker, found itself in a delicate balance. With each victory came greater retaliation from the XLNAC, each battle escalating the conflict further. Humanity was no longer simply reacting to the invasion. They were at war, and the stakes were higher than ever. Back at the Human Command Center in Africa, a plan was in motion to strike back once more, but this time the goal was clear: cripple the XLNAC's ability to wage war on Earth permanently. After weeks of analysis, Dr. Sylvia Morgan had discovered a shocking truth. There was a vulnerability within the XLNAC technology. Their ships and weaponry, though incredibly advanced, were heavily reliant on a central power source located on their largest mothership, a vessel known as the Leviathan. This massive ship was capable of disabling Earth's satellites, controlling XLNAC fleets, and even deploying devastating energy pulses capable of obliterating entire countries. Taking down the Leviathan would be a gamble, but it was a chance they had to take. Walker and his team assembled once again, this time with an even more dangerous plan. The mission was to infiltrate the XLNAC flagship, board it, and plant a series of explosives on the power core. They would have to navigate the most heavily defended ship in the fleet, using their abilities to avoid detection and eliminate threats as quietly as possible. But the risks were enormous. The alien ship was surrounded by multiple fleets, patrolled by drones, and equipped with a state-of-the-art defense system that could wipe them out in an instant. For Walker, it was more than just strategy, it was personal. He had lost friends in the early days of the war, and the thought of continuing this endless cycle of destruction was unbearable. But the attack on the Leviathan was their best chance to turn the tide. As the strike team prepared for the mission, Dr. Morgan pulled Walker aside. "There's something you need to understand," she said, her voice tense. "The XLNAC may not be as invulnerable as we think. They've adapted to humanity's abilities faster than we've adapted to their technology. They know we're coming. They will be ready." Walker nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. They were walking into the lion's den, but they had no choice. The team's infiltration began with precision. Using Sarah's telepathic powers, they bypassed the first line of defense. Zelnak scanners designed to detect human presence. Jonah, able to phase through walls, led the way, allowing the team to slip undetected into the heart of the Leviathan. They moved quickly, striking down any enemy soldiers that crossed their path with ruthless efficiency, using their powers to manipulate their surroundings, evade detection, and disable any Zelnak technology they encountered. But as they neared the heart of the ship, the resistance ran headlong into an unexpected challenge. The Zelnak, it seemed, had anticipated this attack. Their flagship was not just a ship. It was a fortress, equipped with defensive countermeasures that neutralized most human abilities. Telepathy was blocked. Jonah's phasing powers barely worked. Even Walker's enhanced strength was hindered by electromagnetic fields that disoriented their bodies. The odds were stacking up against them. The team was forced to fight their way through corridors, relying on brute force, guerrilla tactics, and the limited powers they had left. The countdown to the detonation of the explosives was ticking in the back of their minds, and they knew that every minute brought them closer to disaster. Yet there was no turning back now. Failure meant not just the end of the mission, but the end of any hope for humanity's survival. In the control room of the Leviathan, the alien commanders watched the intruders with grim faces. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now the reckoning was about to begin. The corridors of the Leviathan were like a labyrinth, every turn obstacle, every passageway a potential trap. The resistance team moved with practiced stealth, but now they were out of time. Their movements were forced into chaos as the ship's internal defense systems kicked into high gear. A deep hum vibrated through the walls, followed by the shrill sound of alarms. The countdown to their mission's success, or failure, was growing more urgent with each passing second. Sarah's telepathic link was being steadily blocked by the ship's psychic dampeners, a mechanism designed to neutralize any telepathic interference. Her mind felt like it was swimming through fog, her connection to the rest of the team faltering with each passing moment. She gritted her teeth, trying to force her powers through the interference. It wasn't enough. The Zelnak had adapted faster than they anticipated, and now they were fighting against not only the physical might of the alien forces, but the ship's built-in defenses. Jonah was in the lead, but even his ability to phase through solid walls was being tested. The electromagnetic fields were disrupting his phasing ability, causing him to flicker in and out of existence. Each time he phased through a door or wall, his body seemed to recoil, as though the very air was pushing against him. He fought to keep his concentration, but the strain was taking its toll. "We need to move faster," Walker barked, his voice tight with urgency. His own enhanced reflexes and strength were hindered by the gravity fields, but he still pushed forward. He could hear the thudding of Zelnak boots behind them, and he knew that the first wave of reinforcements was closing in. The explosion of the Leviathan's power core was still their only hope, if they could reach it in time. They reached the central chamber where the core's control systems were located, a vast room filled with intricate machinery, alien technology glowing with an ominous green light. The core itself, a massive orb of pulsating energy, sat at the center of the room, surrounded by a web of energy conduits and guarded by Zelnak soldiers. "Deploy the charges," Walker ordered, his voice grim. As Marcus and Sarah began planting explosives at key points around the room, Jonah and Walker formed a defensive line. The Zelnak soldiers came charging in, their advanced plasma weapons aimed directly at the intruders. The room erupted into chaos as the first shots rang out. Jonah's phasing abilities were erratic, but he used them to disrupt the Zelnak's ranks, slipping in and out of walls, incapacitating enemies from behind. Meanwhile, Walker was a blur of motion, his enhanced speed and strength enabling him to take down alien soldiers in brutal, fast-paced strikes. But the Excelnac were relentless. They adapted quickly to their movements, countering each of their maneuvers with deadly efficiency. The alien soldiers were more numerous, and their weapons were stronger. For every Excelnac they took down, 2 more appeared in the doorway. "Sarah," Walker shouted, his voice rising over the firefight. "We need those charges active, now." But Sarah was struggling, her mind overwhelmed by the dampening effects. She could feel the Excelnac's mental presence closing in on her, blocking her every move. She was trapped in a mental storm, unable to focus on her task. Panic began to surge through her veins, but then she felt it, a brief flicker of clarity, like a spark in the dark. She closed her eyes, concentrating, pushing through the mental fog. With one final effort, she reached into the energy flow of the core, bypassing the dampeners. Her telepathic link exploded into sharp focus as she connected with the ship's core controls. The lights in the chamber flickered as the first charge was activated. Then another. The detonators were armed. But just as they were about to retreat, the doors slammed shut, sealing them in. A voice echoed across the room, cold, mechanical, yet unmistakably threatening. "Intruders, you have failed. Your resistance ends here." It was the Excelnac commander, the same officer who had been responsible for the deaths of countless human soldiers. He had arrived at the last moment, his powerful presence filling the room. His body was a grotesque hybrid of flesh and cybernetics, and his mind was a perfect, impenetrable fortress of control. He was a walking weapon, and now he had them cornered. The team exchanged grim looks. There was no way out. The countdown had begun, and they had no choice but to hold their ground. The commander raised his hand, and the room was filled with a high-pitched, pulsating energy. The air shimmered around them, and suddenly, a bolt of psychic energy shot out, slamming into Sarah. She collapsed, the pain ripping through her mind like wildfire. But Sarah wasn't the only one with power. Jonah, with sheer determination, phased through the attack, reappearing directly behind the commander. He landed a punch that rattled the alien's frame, but it was only a momentary distraction. Walker rushed forward, his enhanced strength giving him the edge in this desperate struggle. He had only one shot. He lunged at the commander, aiming for a weak point in the alien's armor, praying that the charges would hold long enough. The last stand had begun. The resistance would not go quietly. The room trembled under the weight of the battle. The Excelnac commander, his body a twisted amalgamation of organic and cybernetic parts, towered over Walker with a cold, merciless glare. He raised his hand, and the air around them crackled with the energy of his telekinetic powers, a palpable force that pushed the team back. Sarah was still unconscious, her body limp as the psychic shockwave had sent her into a deep, disorienting blackout. Jonah, now half-formed in the walls of the chamber, was struggling to regain his composure after being thrown by the commander's attack. The pain in his head made it hard to focus, but he knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. Time was running out, and the detonators were armed. If they didn't destroy the core now, humanity's last hope would be lost. "Walker, get the charges out!" Marcus shouted over the chaos, his voice cutting through the gunfire and blinding lights flashing from every angle. The commander was moving toward them, his every step a calculated, destructive force. Walker, undeterred, surged forward despite the oppressive pressure from the alien's telekinetic grip. His enhanced muscles strained under the weight of the force, but his will was unwavering. If they had any chance at all, they had to make it count. He slammed into the commander with all his might, but it was like hitting a wall of steel. The Excelnac commander's eyes flashed with amusement as he effortlessly absorbed the blow, his telekinetic grip tightening. Walker's vision blurred as his feet left the ground, his body held aloft by invisible forces. The air was sucked from his lungs, his mind reeling from the onslaught of pressure. The commander's voice rang out, smooth and calculated. "You thought you could defeat us. You thought your resistance would stop the inevitable. How quaint. But in that moment, something shifted within Walker. His mind, his very soul, was connected to the struggle. He had seen humanity's resilience firsthand, had watched his people rise from the ashes of defeat time and time again. And now, in the heart of this fight, he realized what gave humanity its edge: hope. The hope that no matter how great the odds, no matter how many times they fell, they would always rise again. With a savage roar, Walker broke free from the commander's telekinetic grip. It wasn't a physical feat, it was a mental one. He focused every ounce of his willpower into his body, pushing past the alien's control. The pressure shattered, and Walker crashed to the ground, his body bruised but unbroken. He sprang back to his feet, his blood singing with fury. "Now, Jonah!" Walker shouted. Jonah, still shaken from his face through, snapped back into the moment. He had no time to think. With a burst of energy, he phased through the walls, reappearing behind the commander. With a single, desperate effort, he slammed his fist into the Exelnac's cybernetic spine, causing a sharp, cracking sound. For the first time, the commander staggered, disoriented. It was the opening they needed. Walker surged forward once more, this time aiming for the heart of the commander's weakness, his cybernetic core. His fist found its mark, slamming into the soft tissue between the alien's shoulder and neck, where the organic and synthetic parts of the body met. The commander's body shuddered, and for a moment, the energy he had been channeling faltered. Walker seized the opportunity, grabbing the commander's neck in a crushing grip and driving his knee into the weak spot of the cybernetics. But as the commander fell to his knees, his remaining strength was not gone entirely. His hand shot out, and with a final effort, he sent a blast of telekinetic energy straight toward Walker. The blast hit, and Walker was sent crashing into the far wall, his body slamming into the cold metal. The force of the impact stole the breath from him, but he refused to give in. He forced himself to stand, struggling against the pain. Jonah rushed to his side, and together, they rushed to the detonators, barely avoiding the commander's final attack. The countdown was ticking closer. "Get out," Walker ordered as he grabbed the detonators and ran toward the exit. "It's time." But just as they were about to retreat, the commander rose to his feet once more. His eyes blazed with fury, and his mouth curled into a twisted smile. "You may have delayed the inevitable," he hissed, his voice full of venom. "But you will not leave here alive." The resistance team was down to their last few seconds. There was no more room for hesitation. They had to trust in the plan, and in each other. Jonah turned, using his phasing abilities to shift through the walls of the chamber, finding a route to safety. Marcus, still holding off the alien reinforcements, covered their retreat. Walker, with every ounce of his strength, grabbed Sarah's limp form and carried her to safety. The countdown reached its final moments. As they exited the core room and neared the ship's outer edge, the explosion rang out. The force of the detonation was like the roar of 1,000 storms, the shockwave rippling through the very structure of the Leviathan. For a brief moment, everything went silent, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the mothership exploded in a brilliant burst of light, a flash that illuminated the distant stars. The sound came seconds later, a deafening roar that shook the very fabric of space itself. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the fight was over. But Walker knew better. This was just the beginning of a new era for humanity. They had made their stand, and now, the Exelnac would know what it meant to face an enemy that would never give up. The tide had turned. The reckoning had only just begun. The destruction of the Leviathan was a monumental victory, but it was not without its costs. As the shockwave from the mothership's explosion rippled across the planet, the resistance team staggered to their feet, barely able to comprehend what had just transpired. The air around them was thick with the aftermath of the blast. Radioactive particles, the scent of burning metal, and the dissonant hum of the wreckage settling into the void. Walker looked out over the horizon, his eyes squinting against the glare of the distant fireball. The mission had succeeded, yes, but the war was far from over. There would be more battles, more sacrifices. He knew that. But this time, humanity had dealt the first real blow to the Exelnak, and it would not be the last. Everyone all right? Walker's voice was hoarse but steady. He turned to face the team, his gaze falling on each of them, Jonah, Marcus, and the still unconscious Sarah. "I'm alive," Jonah muttered, his voice strained. He had faced through the walls in the nick of time, but the energy required had left him drained. But that explosion? That wasn't supposed to happen, was it? "It was," Walker said, "and it's just what we needed. The mothership is gone, and with it, their ability to coordinate and maintain their fleets. It's a decisive strike, but we have to keep pushing forward." Marcus nodded grimly, scanning the horizon for any remaining threats. "The battle isn't over. We've got Selnak forces regrouping across the planet. And if there's one thing I know about them, it's that they don't stay down for long." Sarah stirred in Walker's arms, her eyes fluttering open. The mental exhaustion from her previous struggle with the telekinetic dampeners was evident in her face, but the clarity that filled her gaze was unmistakable. She was back, stronger, more focused than before. "I saw it," she said, her voice weak but filled with purpose. "I saw the core. The Exelnak commander was right. This is just the beginning. They've been preparing for this. We've won a battle, but the war—" Walker interrupted her gently. "We've just proven that they can bleed. They're not invincible." Sarah nodded, closing her eyes briefly. "We'll need to capitalize on this. Their leadership is in disarray. This is the moment. If we hit them hard while they're weak, if we drive them from the major cities, they might just break." Walker turned to Marcus and Jonah. "We need to mobilize the remaining awakened. They'll be the key to securing these victories. The Selnak are a hive mind, and without the mothership, they'll have trouble coordinating. This is our time to strike." Jonah cracked a tired grin. "Right, General? You've got your team." "Let's move," Walker said, determination in his eyes. "We have a planet to save." In the weeks that followed, humanity's momentum grew. The destruction of the Leviathan fractured the Exelnak's military might, and the resulting chaos allowed Earth's forces to reclaim vital territory, from the decimated cities of Europe to the industrial heartlands of Asia. The Awakened led the charge, using their unique abilities to devastate alien forces, infiltrate enemy strongholds, and dismantle the Selnak's technological superiority one system at a time. But it wasn't just the Awakened who made the difference. Humanity as a whole had awoken. Across the globe, people rose up, their spirits ignited by the success of the resistance. The once fractured nations of Earth came together, forming a united front against the invaders. Old rivalries and disputes faded into the background as the focus shifted to a singular cause, survival. Yet, even with all their progress, Walker knew the war wasn't won. The Exelnak had lost their flagship, but they were not defeated. Their fleets still loomed in the skies, their remnants scattered but not destroyed. Earth's victory was a hard-won one, but the true challenge lay in what came next. He stood before a war council with representatives from every corner of the planet, military leaders, scientists, strategists, and even the Awakened who had led the charge. The room was filled with a renewed sense of hope, but Walker could feel the tension hanging in the air. The next steps were critical. "Listen," Walker began, his voice strong. "We've proven we can hit them where it hurts, but we have to stay united, stay focused. They're regathering strength. We'll need every last ounce of firepower we have. And the Exelnak, they're not done yet. We have to prepare for the next phase." There was a quiet murmur of agreement around the room. Dr. Sylvia Morgan, standing near the holographic table, added, "We've detected a new formation among their ships. They're assembling something big, something that could change the tide of the war. We don't know exactly what it is, but we're working on it." Then we'll hit them first, Walker said, his resolve hardening. No more waiting. No more reacting. This is our moment. The war wasn't over, but Earth had crossed a threshold. The Selnak had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay the price. There was no turning back. The resistance was no longer just a desperate last hope. They were a force to be reckoned with. The dawn of a new age had begun, and humanity was ready to fight for its future.